Millionaire invites his mistress to dinner. Pregnant wife storms in and overturns the table. In a world where gilded mansions and high-stakes ambitions shine as brightly as polished marble, appearances are everything. Within the prestigious streets of Greenwich, Connecticut, Ethan Harrington has cultivated a glittering reputation, an empire built on cunning deals. A lavish manor overlooking the sea, and a poised wife carrying his unborn child. Yet behind every courteous nod and impeccably tailored suit, secrets smolder like embers about to spark an inferno. One fateful night, over fine wine and hushed tones in an exclusive restaurant, tensions erupt into a very public reckoning. Shattered glass and raw heartbreak expose the messy truth nobody dared speak aloud. Ethan Harrington was born into money-old wealth, laced with understated influence. His grandparents built a modest real estate portfolio that, over time, mushroomed into a local empire. His parents, Evelyn and Peter, passed down both the fortune and the prestige, but it was Ethan who took the Harrington brand to new heights. By his mid-20s, he had expanded the family holdings to include high-profile commercial properties, marinas, and swanky residential developments. Magazines hailed him as a visionary, praising his flair for merging architectural elegance with modern convenience. Everywhere he went, he radiated the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute control. But no empire is without its cracks. At social events, neighbors and partners lauded Ethan's strategic thinking, yet murmurs persisted, grumblings about ruthless business tactics, about deals sealed behind tightly closed doors. He paid little mind to the whispers. Success was a shield after all, and he wore it well. Charlotte Montgomery, who became Charlotte Harrington after a whirlwind romance, embodied timeless grace and an intriguing blend of warmth and reserve. She had made her name as a budding fashion designer in Manhattan, balancing gallery showcases with runway appearances. The pair first met under the lofty ceilings of an art gala, where Ethan arrived to charm prospective investors, while Charlotte showcased a collection inspired by the Victorian era. Their initial conversation crackled with curiosity and tension. Within 6 months, rumors of an engagement danced around their social circles. The wedding itself was a sumptuous affair on the Harrington estate, a swirl of string quartets, crystal chandeliers, and well-heeled guests. Though Charlotte's connection to Ethan seemed to sparkle with authenticity, seeds of doubt were planted early. Perhaps it was the pace of their courtship, or how perfectly they seemed to complete each other's sentences. Some suspected a strategic merger, her rising star in the world of fashion fused to his real estate dominion. She believed Ethan loved her for who she truly was. Yet, in certain unguarded moments, she wondered if he was attracted more to the idea of having a cultured, talented wife on his arm, a worthy adornment to enhance his image. Time passed. Charlotte's once busy schedule of design meetings and fashion events slowed when she learned she was pregnant. She agreed with Ethan that nurturing their future child was paramount, but a faint voice in her head lamented how easily she set aside her career. Meanwhile, Ethan pressed on with his developments, boasting about how fatherhood would inspire him to secure bigger, better deals. Even so, his presence at home felt increasingly sporadic. Gradually, Charlotte noticed discreet changes, phone calls he took away from her earshot, unexplained late nights at the office, and a stale cologne scent on his suits that did not belong to him or her. Denise, Ethan's cheerful personal assistant, initially appeared loyal to Charlotte. Yet Charlotte suspected that some of Denise's professional updates, his meeting schedules, and travel plans grew incomplete. It was as though Ethan had compartmentalized his life into spheres: official business, family obligations, and something that swam in the shadows. Charlotte questioned her own suspicions, unwilling to disrupt her ideal of a loving marriage. She reminded herself that rumors can thrive in the upscale enclaves of Greenwich, fueled by envy as much as truth. Still, she couldn't ignore the glances friends exchanged at country club brunches whenever she mentioned Ethan's extensive business trips. And when Charlotte confided in her closest confidant, Lydia, she was met with silence and a sympathetic squeeze of the hand, confirmation that Lydia, too, sensed something was amiss, but couldn't bring herself to confirm it. In a last-ditch effort to quell her anxiety, Charlotte tried discussing her worries with Ethan directly. He brushed them off, offering carefully rehearsed platitudes. "Everything I do for our family." She wanted to believe him, though her instincts warned otherwise. Perhaps she might have endured the uncertainty a bit longer, if not for a final red flag, a credit card bill that listed repeated charges to an upscale downtown hotel, always on nights when Ethan claimed to be tied up in client dinners or late negotiations. An ache settled in Charlotte's chest. She felt both naive and resentful. Despite her reluctance to suspect the worst, all indicators pointed to the existence of another woman. Desperate for clarity, she hired a discreet private investigator named Gregory Stone. Meeting him in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, she divulged her suspicions. Gregory's calm, methodical demeanor reassured her. He promised to provide evidence one way or another. If Ethan was faithful, Charlotte could breathe easy. If not, she would possess tangible proof. Over the coming weeks, her sleep turned restless. She would stare at the ceiling for hours, imagining Ethan's possible betrayals. She forced down the growing panic by busying herself with preparations for the baby's arrival, choosing curtains, testing paint swatches, and painstakingly reading up on safe cribs. Her designs for a potential comeback fashion collection lay abandoned, overshadowed by her personal turmoil. Then one chilly evening, Gregory sent her a text that sent her heart into a tailspin. "We need to talk. I have photos and timestamps. The affair is real." Charlotte's hands trembled as she read his message. Reality slammed into her with crushing force. With 4 months left in her pregnancy, she was about to confront the betrayal that loomed like a thunderhead over her carefully ordered life. Only one final spark was needed to ignite the entire fuse, and that match was struck when Charlotte discovered her husband's dinner reservation at a clandestine restaurant known for shielding wealthy patrons' secrets. Mentally prepared for confrontation, she climbed into her car, determined that this night would no longer belong to Ethan and his mistress. It was time for the truth to explode into the open. As Charlotte steeled herself for battle, another figure in the unfolding drama prepared for a very different kind of evening. Isabella Marlowe considered herself more than just Ethan Harrington's mistress. A graduate of a prestigious university, she had pursued a career in corporate strategy before being sidetracked by personal ambition. Upon accepting a position as Ethan's special projects coordinator, she soon discovered his penchant for power and secrecy meshed perfectly with her desire to ascend life's ladder swiftly. In the beginning, Isabella's intentions seemed professional. She admired his swift decision-making and the influence he wielded in the real estate arena. Over countless late nights discussing projects in hushed tones, an illicit spark ignited. Perhaps it was the glint in Ethan's eye when she secured a difficult deal, or the gentle hand he sometimes placed at the small of her back as they exited conference rooms. Step by step, Isabella slipped into an affair that promised excitement and financial rewards far beyond her salary. Ethan, for his part, found in Isabella the thrill he lacked at home. She was sharp, daring, and in on his subtlest manipulations. He gifted her with luxuries, designer purses, diamond earrings, even weekend getaways in exclusive resorts. Secret meetings filled with half-lies and rationalizations became the norm. Over time, they shaped their own realm, isolated from the prying eyes of co-workers and sanitized from moral introspection. Still, Isabella sometimes wrestled with guilt. She would catch glimpses of Charlotte's portrait in Ethan's office and feel a twinge. Yet she told herself Charlotte was a sheltered society wife, uninterested in Ethan's true passions. If Charlotte wasn't fulfilling her husband's every need, why should Isabella hold back? This perspective crystallized the night Ethan first stayed over at Isabella's plush apartment. As she watched him stare out her penthouse window at the sprawling city lights, she asked the question that had simmered beneath the surface for weeks. When will you leave her? Ethan had sighed, gently promising that when the timing was right, when business deals wouldn't implode and the unborn child wasn't in jeopardy, he would separate from Charlotte. Isabella latched onto that promise. She chose to believe it, but weeks turned to months, and the baby's birth drew nearer. Ethan began showing signs of strain, juggling the demands of fatherhood preparation with their covert affair. He skipped a couple of scheduled meetings with her. He sometimes seemed distant. Isabella resented feeling sidelined, suspecting he'd never truly give up the prestige of a stable marriage. When she tried to push him for clarity, he only grew more evasive. The night of the infamous dinner, Isabella felt an odd mix of eagerness and impatience. Ethan had suggested they meet at l'Ambroisie Verdi, an exclusive restaurant revered for its strict privacy policy. In hushed phone calls, he mentioned needing to finalize their arrangement to talk about how they'd move forward. This sounded like progress to Isabella. A flicker of hope told her maybe Ethan was ready for the next step. If he was serious about divorcing Charlotte, perhaps he would publicly claim Isabella as his partner. When Isabella arrived, heads turned. She wore a sleek black gown that highlighted her figure, projecting the confidence she privately struggled to maintain. She swept through the candlelit foyer with the self-assurance of a woman who believed her star was on the rise. In the private dining alcove, Ethan awaited her, glancing at the discreet waitstaff to confirm that no cameras or curious guests lurked nearby. She took her seat, carefully crossing her legs. "I'm glad you finally invited me to a respectable venue," she said pointedly, referencing all those furtive hotel suites and remote getaways that made her feel more like a hidden vice than a cherished lover. Ethan offered a tense smile. "I owed you a proper evening, yes. Let's order and talk in comfort." A waiter glided over, and they made their selections: exotic appetizers, delicate entrees, and an expensive bottle of wine. Once alone, Isabella leaned in. "So, are you ready to make things public? How do you plan to handle Charlotte, especially with the baby due?" He fiddled with the corner of his napkin, choosing his words carefully. "I need to ensure that the business remains stable. Public perception matters a lot right now. My board is jittery. We're on the cusp of major deals. A scandalous divorce could spook investors. So I'm still a risk factor," Isabella said, her tone laced with bitterness. "Do you honestly expect me to wait in limbo indefinitely, content with empty promises?" Ethan's gaze flickered with frustration. "Give me time. Once the baby is born and the deals are secured, I can negotiate a private settlement with Charlotte. That's when we can transition into us." Those words, half appealing and half repugnant, hung between them. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, suppressing the swirl of anger and desperation. She wanted to believe him but recognized a pattern. Yet, a mix of love, ambition, and fear bound her to him. The soft glow of table lamps, the gentle murmur of other discreet conversations, the subdued clink of cutlery, everything around them felt intimately secretive. And perhaps the night would have ended quietly, a private arrangement sealed with hushed words and sips of wine, if only fate had allowed. But destiny often has cruel timing, and tonight was no different. Outside, Charlotte had already arrived, her heart hammering in her chest. She was minutes from unleashing a storm that would engulf them all. Isabella, lost in discussing the future with Ethan, had no inkling of the explosion about to erupt. Even Ethan, despite his anxious glances at the entrance, could not have predicted the ferocity of the confrontation that would soon shatter the polished calm of L'Ambroisie Verdi. Charlotte's knees felt wobbly as she stepped out of her car. The illuminated sign of L'Ambroisie Verdi greeted her like a silent sentinel, as though daring her to proceed. She took a steadying breath. Clutching her purse, which held the phone brimming with evidence, she headed for the discreet side entrance. A polished doorman asked for her reservation, and she calmly mentioned she was meeting her husband, Ethan Harrington. The mention of the Harrington name parted any remaining resistance. Within moments, she was ushered inside, the staff too eager to please a wealthy patron to question the lack of a formal reservation. Once in the softly lit corridor, she could already sense the hushed elegance designed to protect high-profile clients from public scrutiny. But tonight there would be no privacy for her husband's covert plans. Inside the private alcove, Ethan and Isabella spoke in tense undertones. Isabella frowned at the worry lines etched across Ethan's forehead. "You haven't touched your wine," she noted, swirling the crimson liquid in her own glass. "Afraid you'll lose your nerve?" Before he could respond, Charlotte's voice sliced through the air. He should be afraid of a lot more than that. Both turned in sync, faces registering shock and horror. Isabella nearly dropped her glass, while Ethan stood so abruptly that his chair teetered. The hush that fell over the restaurant was immediate. Only the faint background music and the distant murmur of other diners persisted. "Charlotte," Ethan began, his voice betraying a tremor. What are you doing here?" Tears burned at the edges of Charlotte's eyes, but fury fueled her composure. "I could ask you the same, except I already know this isn't some innocent business dinner." Isabella placed her glass down, trying to maintain composure. "This is a private conversation," she said in a clipped tone. "You shouldn't be here?" Charlotte finished, anger boiling over. "Oh, I should be at home, right? Waiting like a fool while my husband carries on with his mistress?" She directed a blistering glare at Isabella. "I hope the role of second fiddle suits you, because that's all you'll ever be." Ethan reached out, maybe to place a hand on Charlotte's arm, but she recoiled. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "I trusted you, defended you against rumors." And all the while, this was going on. He stumbled through half-formed excuses. "Please, let's step outside. We can talk privately." "No." Charlotte's tone solidified. "I want the world to see what you truly are, the devoted husband parading around town with a woman behind his pregnant wife's back." A waiter inched forward, distress evident, unsure if he should intervene. Isabella shot him a frigid glance, which caused him to retreat. The rest of the diners strained to catch glimpses of the drama through parted curtains and plush dividers. Murmurs rippled through the restaurant as staff tried, in vain, to preserve the hush. They prided themselves on, Ethan's hands balled into fists. "Charlotte, please, don't beg," she spat. "You only ever beg when you're about to lose something important. It's always about you, your deals, your empire, your image." She turned her glare on Isabella. "And you. Did you think he'd actually leave me for you? You might have the glamour, but he'll never risk his fortune over love or lust." Isabella bristled, cheeks reddening. He deserves someone who stands by him, not someone who tears him down. Charlotte felt a blaze of indignation. "If I weren't tearing him down, I'd have done so the moment I suspected your affair. Instead, I tried to be a supportive wife, ignoring the cracks. But those days are done." She slammed a hand on the table. It rattled, nearly toppling the expensive bottle of wine. A hush fell once again, but the tension screamed louder than any outburst. Then, in a single burst of furious energy, Charlotte grabbed the edge of the table and heaved. Expensive china soared, wine splattered across the floor like spilled blood. Isabella let out a stunned gasp, stumbling backwards to avoid the spray. Ethan watched in horror as plates shattered, a thunderous clatter that drew every eye in the restaurant. In that instant, crystal and porcelain shards became symbols of their fractured life. Charlotte's breath came in ragged gasps. Her pregnant silhouette, taut with rage and heartbreak, riveted everyone's attention. Yet, behind the anger, tears shone in her eyes, reflecting despair over a marriage turned to ash. "This is what you've done," she whispered, voice trembling. "You've broken more than plates tonight." Ethan was speechless. He tried to reach for Charlotte, but she spun around and stormed out, ignoring the manager's desperate attempts to calm her. A hush so thick it felt suffocating weighed upon the dining area, broken only by the crunch of broken glass underfoot. Isabella stood motionless, stunned, her heart thudding. She looked at Ethan, who pressed a hand to his forehead as though in disbelief. Waitstaff hovered, trying to salvage what was left of the meal, or at least coax the diners back to their own business. But the moment was too searing, too dramatic to be contained. Ethan finally found his voice. "I need to go after her," he said, voice cracked with panic. Isabella felt panic surge in her chest. "What about me? You can't just leave me here with this mess." But he was already turning away, stepping through the broken remnants of their dinner. Cameras in smartphones clicked, capturing the humiliating scene. Whatever illusions had protected them before this night were gone. Ethan bolted from the alcove, half running past stunned guests and staff, leaving Isabella among the scattered plates, the splashed wine, and the pungent stench of shattered propriety. By the next morning, the Harrington scandal was the only topic in Greenwich high society. Snippets of video footage, though the restaurant tried to keep phones stowed, had managed to leak. Conversations buzzed at country clubs, spa lounges, and morning brunch tables. Social media flared with speculation. Had the pregnant Miss S. Harrington truly overturned a table? Who was the other woman? And most pressing, would Ethan's business empire survive this blow? Within Harrington Manor, a tense silence reigned. Charlotte had locked herself in the master suite overnight. She neither answered Ethan's calls nor opened the door. He was forced to sleep in a guest room, left alone with the echoes of his public humiliation. Just a floor above him, Charlotte's tears had run dry, replaced by a quiet, resolute anger. She felt a swirl of emotions, from betrayal to fierce protectiveness of her unborn child. In the morning, Charlotte made 2 calls. The first was to Thomas Bentley, her family's attorney, to discuss the prenuptial contract. The second was to Gregory Stone, the private investigator who had gathered conclusive evidence of Ethan's affair. She needed to understand her legal standing, whether it meant separation, a formal divorce, or some other path. More than anything, she wanted to ensure that her child's future was protected. After arranging meetings, Charlotte finally emerged from her room. She descended the grand staircase to find Ethan pacing the foyer. The moment he saw her, he approached with hands half raised, as though entreating a wounded animal. "Charlotte, please just talk to me. Yell at me if you must. Anything but this silence." She paused, arms crossed over her chest, eyes cold. "I'm meeting my lawyer. That's the only conversation that matters right now." His shoulders sagged. "I know I messed up. 1, I don't have an excuse other than sheer stupidity and selfishness. But let's discuss the baby. Our child deserves a father who honors his vows." She snapped. "You think a handful of apologies undoes what I saw last night?" She took a steadying breath. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? For me and for our future child? You've flaunted your affair in public, maybe quietly before, but now the entire town knows." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I never intended to hurt you. I was trying to keep business afloat." "Business," She spat the word as though it tasted foul. That's what we are, right? A deal you made to portray the perfect family. Maybe we were always just another step in your climb, something you didn't consider worth preserving once it got complicated. She left him standing in the hallway, a swirl of guilt and panic in his eyes. Minutes later, she stepped into her car and instructed the driver to head downtown. She had no desire to linger in a house that now felt more like a gilded prison than a home. Meanwhile, Isabella woke up in her own apartment, feeling the sting of the previous night's fiasco. Numerous calls from gossip columnists blinked across her phone, and a few from friends, some curious, others genuinely concerned. She resisted checking social media. The last thing she wanted was to see the public's condemnation of her. Instead, she scoured the news websites. In the coverage, she was painted as a callous seductress, a home wrecker. The undercurrent of shame and defiance left her unsettled. Her phone buzzed with a call from Ethan. For a moment, she considered ignoring him, remembering how abruptly he'd bolted after Charlotte. But she answered, wanting to know what came next. "What do we do?" she blurted before he could speak. He sighed heavily. "I'm doing damage control. My PR consultant is drafting a statement about personal challenges. That's all I can say publicly. As for us," his voice trailed off. A spike of dread ran through her. "Don't tell me you're backtracking. You said you wanted a future with me." "Yes, but it's not that simple," Ethan interjected. "Charlotte's furious. And she's pregnant. If she files for divorce citing infidelity, I'll be in a very weak position financially and socially. There's also the child. Public backlash could ruin my deals." Rage flared in Isabella's chest. "So you want to pin this on me? Or do you want me to lie low while you try to keep your wife from divorcing you?" "I need you to keep a low profile," he admitted, voice taut with worry. "Maybe once things settle." She let out a bitter laugh. "You keep asking me to stay hidden, waiting for you to handle things. When do I get to live openly? Or are you stringing me along like a puppet while you salvage your empire?" "It's not like that," he insisted. "I just need time." His words echoed hollowly. Isabella ended the call, simmering in frustration. She had chosen to believe Ethan's promises, but after the spectacle of the night before, any illusions of a smooth transition into his life had shattered. She felt used, yet deep down she still craved the life he represented: wealth, influence, the thrill of being close to real power. That afternoon, 2 separate legal consultations took place in different corners of Greenwich. Charlotte met with Thomas Bentley, reviewing her prenuptial terms. A critical clause included heavier penalties for Ethan if an affair could be proven, something she had in spades. She felt a measure of vindication, but the complexities involving custody and child support weighed on her. She was not a vindictive person by nature, but Ethan's betrayal had struck her at her core. Across town, in a glossy penthouse office, Ethan sat with his attorney, Marion West, along with his PR specialist. They charted strategies to stem investor panic. Marion warned him that if Charlotte pressed for a divorce with those infidelity clauses, he could lose more than half his holdings. The old Ethan would have brushed it off, confident in his ability to negotiate. Now, he recognized how precariously everything hung by a thread. His brand, his image, his fortune potentially all at stake, thanks to his own recklessness. In the ensuing days, real estate deals teetered, with some partners demanding clearer commitments from Ethan's camp, wary of scandal. The tabloids gleaned more details, printing incriminating photos from the restaurant scene. Rumors about Charlotte's next move ran rampant, from the possibility of a swift divorce to claims she might flee to Europe or retreat to a remote family estate. Inside the tumult, Charlotte remained quiet. She needed time to decide whether to salvage fragments of her marriage or burn every bridge and start anew. The heartbreak was raw, but a practical voice told her that cutting ties too rashly might hurt her unborn child's security. She vacillated between fury, despair, and an aching nostalgia for the early days of their relationship, before Ethan's duplicity overshadowed everything. As the gossip churned, and as Ethan scrambled to plug holes in his sinking reputation, a single fact loomed above all else. The Harrington family facade was irreparably cracked. No matter how fervently Ethan tried to restore it, no matter what calm statements or lavish apologies he offered, the foundations of trust and fidelity were gone. And now, 3 lives, Ethan's, Charlotte's, and Isabella's, were locked in a web of betrayal that only tightened the more they struggled to break free. In the weeks following the restaurant fiasco, Charlotte withdrew from public view. She turned down invitations to upscale luncheons and charity balls, refusing to play the part of a dutiful socialite in the midst of her turmoil. The Harrington estate felt stifling. She caught glimpses of Ethan pacing on phone calls or burying himself in files within his study. Their interactions were minimal and frostbitten. The household staff tiptoed around the tension. One afternoon, she ventured into the garden, a sprawling oasis complete with marble statues and carefully manicured hedges. There, under a weeping willow, she ran into Zachary Coleman, an old acquaintance who had collaborated with Ethan on prior development projects. Zachary was more than a business associate. He and Charlotte had exchanged pleasant conversations at social gatherings over the years. He'd come by to discuss a pending real estate venture with Ethan, only to learn from the butler that Ethan was out. As they exchanged polite greetings, Charlotte sensed genuine empathy in Zachary's warm gaze. He asked about her health and the baby, carefully sidestepping the scandal. She appreciated the tact, finding it far more comforting than the forced pity or the blatant curiosity she usually encountered. "You don't look well," Zachary said gently, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. "I know it's none of my business, but if you ever need a break from all this," she offered a faint smile. "It's hard to run from your own life, especially when you're carrying a little one inside. But thanks." He paused, as though weighing his next words. "For what it's worth, I've always admired your strength. Even before all of this, you have a rare blend of class and resilience. Don't let anyone, least of all Ethan, overshadow that." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "You're kind to say so. Right now, I'm just trying not to drown in the chaos he's unleashed." They stood there amidst the rustling leaves, a hush enveloping them. For a brief moment, Charlotte felt seen as a person, not just the wife or the scorned figure in a scandal. She exhaled slowly, feeling a tension lift from her shoulders. Zachary's presence reminded her that she was still capable of forging connections outside the twisted narrative. Ethan's choices had created, over the next few days, a quiet rapport developed between them. Zachary visited under the pretext of finalizing contractual paperwork with Ethan, but he would often linger in the garden with Charlotte if Ethan remained absent. They spoke in measured tones about art, music, and neutral topics, but occasionally touched on personal matters, her uncertain future, his own experiences navigating the cutthroat world of real estate. Although she tried to keep her guard up, Charlotte appreciated the chance to converse without being met by pity or condemnation. Ethan, engrossed in salvaging his business, only gradually noticed the friendly exchanges. He began to sense a subtle shift in the dynamic whenever he entered a room with them. Charlotte would straighten her posture and speak more guardedly, while Zachary's eyes flickered with an unreadable expression. Initially, Ethan dismissed it as paranoia, but as the days passed, his ego found fresh fuel for anxiety. A gnawing thought took hold. Could Charlotte be finding solace in Zachary's attention? Meanwhile, Isabella's life also twisted in unforeseen ways. She maintained her corporate role, but faced scornful whispers from colleagues who suspected her liaison with the boss. Her sense of isolation deepened, and she spent more evenings alone in her swanky apartment, nursing a hollow ache that no amount of fine wine could fill. She avoided public gatherings, reluctant to fuel the rumor mill. One evening, while scrolling through old photos on her phone, a mix of business events, stolen kisses with Ethan, and glimpses of lavish hotel suites, Isabella came across a folder containing pictures she'd surreptitiously taken. They depicted Charlotte in innocent moments, stepping out of her car, meeting with an attorney, chatting with Zachary in the garden. Isabella had followed Charlotte once or twice, fueled by a strange combination of jealousy and curiosity. Now, staring at the image of Charlotte smiling, Isabella felt a pang of conflicted emotion. Charlotte's expression wasn't triumphant or smug. If anything, it seemed tinged with sadness. A barrage of complicated feelings surged. Isabella wondered if she had grossly oversimplified Charlotte's role in Ethan's life, dismissing her as a pampered princess who didn't appreciate him. Indeed, Charlotte was not the detached trophy wife Isabella had imagined. She was a woman grappling with heartbreak, and Isabella had played a central part in that suffering. Yet, Isabella also recognized that stepping away from Ethan meant giving up the promise of a life. She'd striven toward power, influence, wealth. Late that night, Isabella's phone lit up with a message from Ethan. "I'm arranging an investor meeting tomorrow. Need your insights on commercial expansions. Let's meet at 2 p.m. It was all business, with no mention of affection or apology. She tossed the phone aside, feeling used. But she still planned to attend. Professional obligations were all she had left to maintain even a tenuous link with him. Back in the Harrington home, Charlotte found herself pondering her next step. For all her rage, something held her back from immediately filing for divorce. She questioned if severing ties before the baby's birth would ignite a vicious custody war. Did she have the strength to fight not just for her dignity, but for her child's future? Gradually, she recognized a sobering truth. Her life had already changed irrevocably, with or without a formal legal decision. The illusions of perfect matrimony were shattered, replaced by a lonely resolve to prioritize her own well-being and that of her baby. If that meant forging quiet alliances like her, growing friendship with Zachary, so be it. Neither Ethan nor Isabella had any notion that these small comfort zones Charlotte and Zachary were creating could become pivotal in the storm yet to come. While Ethan chased profit and Isabella weighed her ambitions, Charlotte slowly, cautiously, discovered reservoirs of support she never imagined. And in doing so, she gathered the strength that might one day overshadow both her husband's empire and his mistress's schemes. As the scandal roiled on, Ethan's once unassailable business aura dimmed. Several investors began to waver, alarmed by the negative press, and Ethan's apparently fraught domestic situation. Pressure mounted for Ethan to publicly restore confidence. Even Donovan Rise, a real estate magnate who had been eyeing a partnership with Harrington Real Estate, delayed signing final papers. To many in the industry, it seemed Ethan's personal unraveling foreshadowed potential cracks in his financial stability. In an attempt to showcase stability, Ethan invited Donovan and a handful of other heavyweights to a cocktail reception at a luxury hotel. The gathering oozed refinement, live jazz, impeccable hors d'oeuvre, and top-tier champagne. But beneath the polished surface simmered a sense that everyone was scrutinizing Ethan for signs of weakness. Zachary Coleman was also present, representing one of the major firms tangentially involved in a new waterfront development project. As he nursed a sparkling water by the bar, he spotted Ethan in the center of a small group, projecting confidence but looking visibly drained. While Ethan regaled the investors with talk of expansion, Zachary could see the lines of tension bracketing his mouth. "Isn't it curious," came a mocking voice to Zachary's left, "how quickly the mighty can stumble?" He turned to see Donovan Reyes approaching, a thin smile on his lips. Zachary shrugged. Running a large operation is never easy. Even someone like Ethan isn't invulnerable to personal setbacks. Donovan raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to put it. From what I hear, it's more than a simple setback. He's facing potential upheaval at home, prenuptial clauses, a pregnant wife who might walk away with half his fortune if she files for adultery." Zachary kept his expression neutral, unwilling to betray any personal knowledge. "Gossip aside, Ethan's business acumen is proven. That's why you wanted to partner with him, no?" "Certainly," Donovan replied, swirling the liquor in his glass. "But the market hates uncertainty. And nothing spells uncertainty like a high-profile scandal and an angry spouse. One misstep, and the Harrington brand loses its gloss." Zachary quietly absorbed this. He cared little for Donovan's opportunism, but he understood it was part of the industry's ruthless nature. "Time will tell," he said simply, moving away to avoid further fueling Donovan's smug speculation. Meanwhile, Ethan was at the heart of a conversation about ambitious new developments. A quick glance around the room told him how carefully everyone was observing him. He forced a confident laugh, reciting the standard lines about forging ahead, ensuring robust returns, and planning for expansions into neighboring cities. However, there was an unmistakable tension in his posture. At one point, he spotted Zachary, who was speaking quietly with a couple of other investors. An irrational surge of jealousy struck him, remembering how Zachary had been spending time with Charlotte. Was his wife confiding in Zachary about personal matters? The thought unnerved him, further splintering the composure he tried to maintain. Isabella arrived an hour into the reception, wearing an understated yet elegant dress, determined not to draw undue attention. She felt compelled to appear in a professional capacity, believing she still held a vital role in Ethan's enterprise. But the moment she entered the spacious lounge, she sensed the eyes on her, a swirl of whispers, instantly igniting about the mistress brazen enough to show up. Ethan saw her too, and a flicker of panic crossed his face. While he'd asked her to keep a low profile, he hadn't explicitly forbidden her attendance. She caught his gaze, an unspoken question in her eyes. "Do you want me gone?" He gave a slight shake of his head. He couldn't afford another public spectacle, then turned back to his conversation. Isabella, swallowing her discomfort, found a corner near the bar to stand quietly. It wasn't long before Donovan Reyes sidled up to her. "Miss Marlowe, correct? I've heard about your strategic insights with Harrington Real Estate." She nodded, wary. "Yes, I manage special projects and expansions." Donovan's smile was cordial, though his eyes gleamed with a predator's curiosity. Must be quite the balancing act, especially these days. Isabella detected the double meaning. "Every business faces challenges," she said smoothly, "but I'm confident in our forward momentum." He took a sip of his drink. "I admire confidence. Yet, with swirling rumors and potential boardroom battles, one might question if the Harrington brand is sturdy enough to weather certain personal storms." His insinuations lingered in the air. She stiffened. "Mr. Harrington is capable of separating business from personal life. Our developments remain on track." Donovan chuckled. "Ah, Miss Marlowe, if only walls between personal and professional matters were so neatly sealed. Well, best of luck." With that, he moved on, leaving Isabella fuming over his veiled jabs. In a far corner, Ethan was cornered by another investor, demanding assurances that next quarter's forecasts wouldn't be derailed by family drama. Ethan insisted that everything was under control, but the investor's skeptical look said otherwise. By the evening's end, Ethan felt drained, aware that no matter how many polished promises he offered, trust had been rattled. As the crowd dispersed, Zachary briefly touched Ethan's shoulder. "Hey, might want to take a breather. You look worn out." Ethan gave a curt nod, tension etched in every line of his face. He glanced at Isabella, who lingered by the exit, casting him an uncertain look. "Yeah, thanks," he murmured, but his tone lacked warmth. Walking out, Ethan realized just how fragile his position had become. The veneer of success he wore was cracking under the combined weight of scandal and fear. Even if Charlotte chose not to file for divorce immediately, the rumor alone might hamper his expansion deals. He had become a man racing against time, scrambling to keep the pillars of his empire upright, all while the foundation his marriage continued to crumble beneath him. On a brisk afternoon, Charlotte stood in the grand foyer of the Harrington estate, her suitcases beside her. She had finally decided to leave for a while at least, to clear her mind from the claustrophobic tension that suffocated the mansion. Her destination was a secluded cottage near the coastline, owned by a cousin who had offered it for as long as she needed. There, she would have space to think about her child's future without constant reminders of Ethan's betrayal. Ethan approached, eyes clouded with desperation. "You're leaving?" He glanced at her suitcases, his voice cracking. "Charlotte, please, can't we talk?" She drew a controlled breath. "We've done nothing but hurl accusations and half apologies at each other. You can't keep me here against my will. I need clarity for myself and for our baby. Believe it or not, I don't want us at each other's throats." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Don't," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm too hurt, and the trust is gone." In the silence that followed, Ethan looked as if he might collapse under the weight of his regret. "At least let me know where you'll be. I'll send you an address," she replied. "But I want space. No surprise visits." Then she stepped out into the crisp air, leaving the once imposing home behind as Reggie, the loyal driver, loaded her luggage into the car. In those tense moments, Ethan felt a sting of finality. He realized that Charlotte's departure could be the prelude to divorce, or maybe just a trial separation. Either way, the emotional vacuum weighed on him. Back inside, he found the hush of the estate unnerving. Every echo in the grand corridors reminded him of how thoroughly he had shattered the harmony they once shared. Later that day, he reached out to Isabella, half out of habit and half out of desperation. She arrived at his office, wearing a crisp blouse and pencil skirt, trying to maintain a veneer of professionalism despite the swirl of conflicting emotions inside her. She sat across from him at the large desk, noticing how tired he looked. "I need your take on the next steps," Ethan began, sliding a file toward her. "These are potential partners for expansions in the next quarter. My usual circle is skittish, so I'm forced to look for alternative funding." Isabella glanced through the papers. "Some of these groups are less stable than we'd prefer. High risk, high reward. Are you sure this is wise right now?" He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Not particularly. But I'm cornered. If I don't push forward, the rumors might morph into a self-fulfilling prophecy, investors withdrawing because they think we're going under." They talked shop for an hour, charting strategies, analyzing financial models. Yet, at the back of Isabella's mind lingered the unspoken question, what about us? Eventually, she mustered the courage to broach the subject. "Ethan," she said quietly, placing the documents aside, "where does our relationship stand?" He gazed at her with hollow eyes. "Charlotte left the estate. We're in limbo. I have no idea if she'll file for divorce. My lawyers say I should try to reconcile, at least to prevent a public legal battle." A pulse of pain throbbed in Isabella's chest. "So you want me to vanish? Pretend we never happened?" "Because if she decides on reconciliation, I can't be around." Ethan tried to form a response, but faltered. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "My life is in pieces. Part of me still wants you, but I also can't ignore what's at stake with Charlotte. The baby and the business. Isabella swallowed the knot in her throat. All her prior confidence in capturing Ethan's devotion now felt like a foolish fantasy. I won't wait forever, Ethan. I can't remain your best-kept secret while you hope to salvage your public image. That's not living. He raked a hand through his hair. I understand. I just need more time. She gave a sad laugh, fighting back tears she refused to shed. You always need more time. Gathering her things, Isabella left his office, a swirl of emotions tangling in her chest. Anger, regret, a lingering hope she couldn't quite extinguish. She'd reached a crossroads where her desire for the life Ethan symbolized warred with her growing realization that he might never truly choose her. Meanwhile, Charlotte arrived at the coastal cottage. The sea air and the sound of crashing waves provided a stark contrast to Greenwich's manicured lawns. She settled into the cozy space, far smaller than the Harrington mansion, but infinitely more peaceful. Each morning, she took contemplative walks along the shoreline, feeling the baby's kicks as a reminder of what mattered most. She also spent time on the phone with her lawyer, shaping contingency plans. Thomas Bentley explained that she held a strong position given the prenup's infidelity clause. Still, she hesitated to wield that power as a cudgel. Part of her considered trying to salvage the marriage if Ethan would genuinely repent. Yet, her pride and wounded heart cautioned against trusting him. Zachary called occasionally, checking on her well-being with a gentle tone that never crossed boundaries. Their conversations offered her solace. She appreciated his ability to speak openly about the complicated nature of heartbreak. In truth, she felt a budding warmth in his kindness, a flicker she tried to downplay, given her complicated circumstances. One late afternoon, after a contemplative walk on the beach, Charlotte returned to find a letter slipped under the cottage door. It was from Ethan. Briefly, her heart jumped, wondering if he'd driven all the way out. She opened the envelope to find a handwritten note. I know I can't fix what I've broken overnight, but please talk to me. Let me be there for our child. I'm lost without you. She read it over twice, tears brimming. She felt the old tug of nostalgia for the man she once believed Ethan to be. But she also recalled the image of him in that intimate restaurant booth, leaning close to Isabella. Folding the note, she set it on the table, uncertain whether to respond. Her next choice could define everything: her future, her baby's upbringing, and maybe even the empire Ethan so desperately tried to preserve. Far away, in Greenwich, that same tension clung to Ethan's steps as he exited his office building at dusk, aware that no matter how meticulously he worked on deals, it might all crumble if Charlotte unleashed the evidence of his affair. At the same time, Isabella wondered how long she'd cling to someone who refused to claim her openly. And in her quiet seaside refuge, Charlotte began realizing that sometimes the only way forward is to walk away from the illusions you've outgrown, even if it means shattering the gilded cage you once called home. Wealth and power promise the world, yet behind the refined smiles and expensive suits, hidden turmoil can transform a glamorous life into a fragile facade. Ethan Harrington's empire trembles at its foundation as broken vows and explosive truths threatened to destroy the very legacy he worked so hard to build. Caught in the fallout, Charlotte stands poised to reclaim her autonomy, and Isabella grapples with the realization that empty promises rarely become reality. If this tangled tale of passion and betrayal kept you on edge, remember to show your support. Hit the like button, share this story with friends who love high-stakes drama, and subscribe for more riveting narratives. What do you think awaits Ethan, Charlotte, and Isabella on the other side of heartbreak and ambition? Let us know your thoughts. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, fueling more twists and real-life lessons still to come.
He was a titan of Wall Street, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was the perfect wife, an elegant shadow who hosted his galas and warmed his bed. To the world, Kate and Athena Vance were a golden couple, the epitome of wealth and power. But behind the gilded doors of their Manhattan penthouse, a different story was being written. It was a story of quiet desperation, of secrets kept locked away like jewels. And it all came to a head on a Tuesday evening over a meal of seared scallops and shattered vows. When he made the biggest mistake of his life. He underestimated her. He thought she was just a wife. He was about to find out she was a warrior. The crystal glasses on the table at Per Se sparkled, catching the late evening light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Each tiny rainbow that danced on the crisp white tablecloth was a testament to the life Kate Vance had built. A life of exquisite taste, of rarefied air, of untouchable success. Athena, his wife of 12 years, sat opposite him, a vision in a sapphire blue dress that matched the velvet of the chairs. To any casual observer, they were the picture of marital bliss, a power couple dining at one of New York City's most exclusive 3 Michelin-star restaurants. The waiter, a man whose posture was as starched as his uniform, had just finished describing the oysters and pearls, a signature dish of sabayon, of pearl tapioca, with Island Creek oysters and sterling white sturgeon caviar. Kate had ordered it without a glance at the menu. His eyes, the color of faded denim, fixed on his wife with an intensity that had once made her heart flutter. Now it sent a chill down her spine. "Did you hear me?" Athena Kate's voice was smooth, a polished stone of authority. It was the same voice he used to command his hedge fund, Sterling Vance Global. The same voice that had made him a legend on Wall Street before he'd even turned 40. Athena offered a small, practiced smile. "Of course, darling. Oysters and pearls. It sounds divine." She picked up her water glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips, a welcome anchor in the suddenly turbulent sea of her own intuition. Something was wrong. The air was thick with it, an unspoken tension that the polite hum of the restaurant couldn't dissipate. Kate hadn't been home for dinner in weeks. His life was a whirlwind of international flights, late-night conference calls, and the endless pursuit of more. More money, more power, more everything. So this sudden intimate dinner at a place he knew she adored was an anomaly. It was a gesture so out of character that it could only mean one of 2 things, a grand conciliatory surprise or the prelude to a carefully orchestrated execution. As the first course arrived, a delicate mosaic of artfully arranged seafood, Athena's sense of dread solidified. Kate ate with a mechanical precision, his fork and knife moving with an unnerving lack of enjoyment. He was a man going through the motions, a performer on a stage of his own making. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Athena," he began, placing his cutlery down with a soft click. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and for a fleeting moment she saw the man she had married, the ambitious, charming, slightly reckless man who had swept her off her feet at a charity gala all those years ago. But the warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cool, calculating glint she had come to associate with his business dealings. "About us?" He continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as if he were sharing a stock tip. "About our future." Athena's heart began a frantic staccato against her ribs. She kept her expression serene, a mask she had perfected over years of society events and tense board member dinners. Inside, she was a wreck of nerves. She knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the diamonds on her wrist that this was not about a surprise trip to the Maldives. The main course was served. Seared scallops for her, a dry-aged côte de bœuf for him. The rich aroma filled the space between them, a stark contrast to the emotional void that had been growing for years. "We've had a good run, you and I," Kate said, slicing into his steak with surgical precision. "We were a great team. You with your grace and your social connections. Me with the capital." He smirked, a self-satisfied curl of his lips that she had once found endearing and now found repulsive. "Kate, what is this?" Athena's voice was barely a whisper, but it was firm. She would not allow him to see her crumble. Not here. Not ever. He sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured regret. "We've grown apart, Athena. It's no one's fault. It just happens." He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke Tom Ford suit, the fabric a dark, expensive grey that seemed to absorb the light around it. He pulled out a crisp, folded document, a manila envelope. He slid it across the table. The envelope moved with a soft, insidious hiss, coming to a stop just beside her plate of half-eaten scallops. The corner of it touched the rich, buttery sauce, a small, obscene stain on its pristine surface. "What is this?" she asked again, though she already knew. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her feeling cold and strangely distant, as if she were watching a scene from a movie. "The divorce papers," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My lawyer, Arthur Klein, drew them up. It's all very standard. Generous, even. I've taken care of you, Athena. You'll be very comfortable." Comfortable. The word hung in the air, a grotesque understatement of the life he was proposing for her. A life without him. A life without the identity she had so carefully curated as Mrs. Kate Vance. She stared at the envelope, at the small, greasy stain. It was a punctuation mark on the end of her marriage, a final vulgar insult. She could feel the eyes of the other diners on them, their curiosity piqued by the hushed, intense nature of their conversation. She could feel the waiter hovering in the periphery, his professional discretion warring with his human desire to witness the drama unfolding. Athena did not cry. She did not scream. She did not throw her wine in his face, as the more theatrical part of her soul urged her to do. Instead, a strange, unnerving calm washed over her. It was the calm of a captain in a storm, the calm of a soldier on the eve of battle. She lifted her gaze from the envelope and met her husband's eyes. He looked smug, confident already, picturing his new life, his new wife, probably that impossibly young, impossibly blonde art consultant she'd seen him with at the Met Gala, a girl whose name she had purposefully forgotten. "I see," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble floors of their penthouse. She picked up her fork and knife. She speared a scallop, dragged it through the sauce, and brought it to her lips. She chewed slowly, deliberately, savoring the taste, savoring the moment. She would not let him ruin her last meal as Mrs. Kate Vance. Kate watched her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected tears, recriminations, a scene. This quiet, unnerving composure was not part of his plan. "I'll have my assistant arrange for your things to be moved out of the penthouse," he said, his voice a little tighter now. "You can stay at the plaza for as long as you need, on my account, of course." "That's very thoughtful of you, Kate," she said, her voice laced with an irony so subtle he missed it entirely. She took another bite of her scallop. "And the jet. Will I still have access to the Gulf Stream?" He chuckled, a short, sharp sound of derision. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Athena. The jet is a business asset." "Of course," she said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. Silly of me to ask. She finished her meal in silence, each bite a small act of defiance. Kate grew increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, checking his Patek Philippe watch. He had expected a swift, clean amputation. This was more like a slow, agonizing surgery, and he was beginning to feel like the patient. When the waiter came to clear their plates, Athena gave him a warm, genuine smile. "The scallops were exquisite," she said. "Please give my compliments to the chef." Kate stared at her, dumbfounded. It was as if she had already accepted her fate, as if the last 12 years of their life together were nothing more than a meal to be consumed and forgotten. He paid the bill, a staggering sum that he didn't even bother to look at, and they stood to leave. He reached for her arm, a gesture of hollow chivalry, but she stepped back, her movement fluid and graceful. "I can manage," she said, her voice cool. They walked out of the restaurant in silence, the doorman holding the heavy glass door open for them. The cool night air of Columbus Circle hit Athena's face a welcome shock after the stifling atmosphere of the restaurant. Kate's driver, a stoic man named Thomas, who had been with him for years, was waiting by the curb with the gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom. Kate opened the rear door for her, the master of his universe, once more. "I'll have Thomas take you to the plaza," he said. Athena paused. She looked at the car, at the life it represented, at the man who was so carelessly casting her aside. And then she did something he never would have predicted. She smiled. A real smile this time, not the practiced placid one she wore for society. This smile was sharp and bright and held a promise of things to come. "No, thank you, Kate," she said, her voice clear and strong in the New York night. "I think I'll take a taxi." And with that, she turned and walked away. Her sapphire dress a streak of defiance against the city lights, leaving Kate standing on the curb. The divorce papers, a useless, stained artifact in a world he was about to discover he no longer controlled. Athena did not take a taxi. She walked. She walked with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her heels clicking a steady, determined rhythm on the pavement of Central Park South. The city's symphony. The distant wail of a siren. The rumble of a subway deep beneath her feet. The cacophony of a dozen different languages was a balm to her shattered nerves. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. Kate thought he was divorcing a socialite, a pretty well-mannered accessory who knew how to pick out fine china and throw a flawless dinner party. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Vance. He had forgotten the girl who had graduated top of her class from MIT with a dual degree in computer science and mathematics. The girl who had been recruited by the NSA before she was 22. The girl who had turned them down, not for lack of skill, but for a deep-seated aversion to the rigid patriarchal structures of government. The girl who had, for a few thrilling anonymous years, been a ghost in the machine, a digital phantom, known only by the handle Nix in the clandestine corners of the dark web. She had given it all up for love, or what she had thought was love. Kate, with his boundless ambition and magnetic charm, had been a force of nature. He had promised her the world, and in his own way, he had delivered. But the price of that world had been her own identity. She had willingly, foolishly placed the sharpest parts of herself in a velvet-lined box and handed it to him for safekeeping. He, in his arrogance, had simply forgotten it was there. Her destination was not the Plaza Hotel with its gilded ceilings and ghosts of old money. It was a nondescript brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street in the West Village, a property she had purchased years ago under a shell corporation, one of many secrets she had kept from her all-knowing, all-controlling husband. Inside the apartment was a stark contrast to the opulent, sterile penthouse she had called home. It was minimalist, functional, and humming with the low thrum of powerful technology. This was her sanctuary, her command center. This was where Athena Vance ceased to exist, and Nyx was reborn. She shed the sapphire dress, letting it pool on the floor like a discarded skin. In its place, she pulled on a simple black t-shirt and yoga pants. She tied her dark hair back, her movements efficient and precise. Then she sat down at the custom-built computer rig that took up an entire wall of the main room. 3 monitors glowed to life, reflecting in her intense, focused eyes. For 12 years, she had been the perfect wife. She had smiled and nodded and played her part. But she had not been idle. She had watched. She had listened. She had learned. She had seen the way Kate moved his money, the complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations and blind trusts he used to shield his vast fortune from taxes, from competitors from the world. He had bragged about it to her on more than one occasion, drunk on champagne, and his own genius never once imagining that the woman he dismissed as a beautiful simpleton was mentally mapping his financial empire, identifying its vulnerabilities, its back doors, its kill switches. He had built his kingdom on the shifting sands of the digital world, and she was its architect. She had helped him design the security protocols for Sterling Vance Global, in its early days a fun little project, he had called it. He had taken her brilliant, innovative code and passed it off as his own, a footnote in their history he had long since forgotten. But she hadn't. She remembered every line, every algorithm, every deliberately placed secret back door she had woven into the fabric of his digital fortress. A back door only she could open. A key only she possessed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room, a relentless, rhythmic assault. It was a language she was more fluent in than English, a world where she was not a wife, but a god. She started with the small peripheral accounts first. The slush fund for his discretionary expenses, which she knew included lavish gifts for a certain blonde art consultant. A few million here, a few million there. Transferred not to her own name, of course. That would be amateurish. Instead, the money was sliced and diced, routed through a dizzying labyrinth of cryptocurrencies, Monero, Zcash, Grin, all chosen for their untraceable privacy-enhancing features. From there it was funneled into a dozen newly created accounts in banks, stretching from the Cayman Islands to Liechtenstein, all opened under pseudonyms and protected by layers of encryption that would make the NSA's top cryptographers weep. Next, she went for the personal brokerage accounts. E-Trade, Charles Schwab, Fidelity. Kate, in his hubris, used a single complex password, for all of them a string of characters, based on the date he had closed his first billion-dollar deal. A date he had once called the most important day of my life right in front of her. She had smiled and topped up his champagne and filed that little tidbit away in the recesses of her mind. The password was a fortress, but a fortress with a key. And she had it. Within minutes, she had liquidated his entire personal stock portfolio. Hundreds of millions of dollars in blue-chip stocks, tech giants, and emerging market funds. The market would barely register the massive sell-off until the morning, and by then it would be too late. The proceeds were immediately converted into a stablecoin DAE and moved to a decentralized finance DeFi lending protocol, where it was borrowed against, swapped, and scattered across the blockchain, becoming a ghost of its former self. The sun was beginning to cast its first pale grey light over the city when she finally breached the main gate. Sterling Vance Global's primary operating account. This was the heart of the beast the dragons hoard. It was protected by a multi-signature authentication process requiring 3 separate digital keys for any major transfer. One was Kate's. The second belonged to his CFO, a man named David Chen. The third, they believed, was held in a secure offline vault, a last line of defense against any conceivable cyber attack. They were wrong. The third key had never been in a vault. The third key was a piece of code she had written herself, a phantom signature that could be activated by a unique time-sensitive algorithm linked to a sequence of prime numbers. It was her masterpiece, her Trojan horse planted in the heart of his empire years ago, waiting for this very moment. She initiated the transfer, a breathtaking sum, $975 million. The system prompted for the 3 keys. Key 1. Kate Vance. She bypassed it using the back door she had built, a flaw in the system's architecture that only she knew existed. Key 2. David Chen. She already had his credentials. She had socially engineered them out of him a year ago over a glass of Chardonnay at a charity auction by pretending to have forgotten the Wi-Fi password for the event. He had gallantly typed it into her phone for her, and in doing so had unwittingly given her access to a keystroke logger she had discreetly installed. He used the same password for everything. People always did. Key 3. The vault. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, inputting the prime number sequence. The algorithm came to life. The phantom signature was generated. Authentication successful. Transfer initiated. She watched as the progress bar crept across the screen. 975,000 USD. From Sterling Vance Global, New York, to an anonymous encrypted wallet on the other side of the world. Transfer complete. She leaned back in her chair, the first rays of dawn illuminating her face. It was done. The entire liquid fortune of Kate Vance, a man who measured his worth in dollars and cents, had vanished into the digital ether. He was a king without a kingdom, a dragon without his gold. She thought of him waking up in their penthouse alone in the king-sized bed. He would reach for his phone as he always did to check the markets. He would see the alerts, the liquidations, the transfers. He would feel a flicker of confusion, then annoyance, then a dawning, gut-wrenching horror as he realized the true scale of the devastation. He would call his bankers, his lawyers, his tech support. They would find nothing. No trace, no trail, no culprit. Just an empty vault and the lingering ghostly echo of a digital phantom named Nyx. Athena stood up and stretched her body aching from the long night. She walked to the window and looked out at the waking city. The sapphire dress lay on the floor, a crumpled reminder of the woman she had been. She was not that woman anymore. Kate had slid the divorce papers across the table while she was still eating. By morning, his bank account was empty. He had wanted to erase her from his life. Instead, she had erased his. The game had just begun, and she had already won. Kate Vance woke to the familiar, sterile silence of his penthouse. The morning sun, usually a welcome guest, streamed through the panoramic windows with an almost accusatory glare, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny mocking spirits. He reached across the vast expanse of the custom-made bed, his hand patting the empty space where Athena should have been. A faint, lingering scent of her perfume, Joe Malone's peony and blush suede, was the only evidence she had ever been there at all. He grunted a sound of satisfaction. It was done. clean, efficient. He had excised the weakest part of his life, and now he was free to pursue his merger with the future. A future embodied by a 26-year-old named Anastasia, whose primary assets were a flawless bone structure and an uncritical admiration for his genius. His morning routine was as precise and unvarying as a Swiss watch. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet sinking into the plush white carpet. He strode into the master bathroom, a cavern of Italian marble and chrome, and stepped onto the smart scale. His weight, body fat percentage, and hydration levels flashed up on the mirrored screen. All optimal. He was a machine finely tuned and perfectly maintained. He showered the water pressure, a precise, invigorating torrent. As he shaved, he issued a series of commands to his home AI, a disembodied female voice he called Juno. Juno. What's the Hang Seng doing? The Hang Seng index is down 0.4%. Kate, and the pre-market for Sterling Vance SVG is currently trading up 1.2% in pre-market at 8. A small, smug smile played on his lips. Of course it was. Everything he touched turned to gold. He was the Midas of the modern age. He dressed in a crisp white shirt and a charcoal grey suit, the fabric whispering of wealth. He slipped the Patek Philippe onto his wrist, its familiar weight a comforting reassurance of his place in the world. It was only then, as he sat on the edge of the bed to put on his hand-stitched Italian leather shoes, that he reached for his phone on the bedside table. And the world began to tilt on its axis. The screen was a sea of red, a cascade of notifications from his various banking and brokerage apps. Fidelity alert. A full liquidation of your portfolio has been executed. Charles Schwab alert. Your account balance is $200. Bank of America. Private bank alert. A wire transfer of $2,345.789.14 has been completed. Your new balance is 12,54 falls. He stared at the phone, his brain refusing to process the information. It was impossible. A glitch, a system error, some sort of elaborate, unfunny prank. He tried to open his primary Sterling Vance global mobile banking app, the one that gave him a real-time overview of the company's core financials. Access denied. Your credentials are no longer valid. The blood drained from his face. The finely tuned machine of his body suddenly felt cold, sluggish. He tried again, and again. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. A primal roar of frustration and rage ripped from his throat, echoing through the silent, cavernous penthouse. He threw the phone against the wall where it shattered the screen, spiderwebbing into 1,000 tiny fractures, a perfect metaphor for his crumbling reality. He scrambled for his laptop, his movements clumsy, frantic. He bypassed the sleek, user-friendly interface and went straight for the mainframe. His fingers flying across the keys with a desperate, forgotten muscle memory from his early days as a coder. The numbers he saw on the screen were not just numbers. They were the building blocks of his identity, the very foundation of his ego. And they were gone. The main operating account, $1,000, $432.99. The reserve fund, $567.88. The offshore holding accounts in the Caymans, in Switzerland, in Singapore. Empty. All of them. Drained to the last cent. A billion-dollar empire built over 2 decades of ruthless ambition and relentless work had evaporated overnight. It wasn't just the money, it was the precision, the sheer impossible speed of it all. This wasn't a hack. A hack was messy traceable. This was an assassination, a clean, silent, devastatingly elegant execution. And then he knew. It couldn't be. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly insane, that he almost dismissed it. Athena. His quiet, demure, technologically illiterate wife. The woman who still called him to ask how to attach a photo to an email. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, creeping dread began to seep into his bones. He started to see it, to connect the dots he had been too arrogant to even notice before. The way her eyes would sometimes glaze over when he talked about his work, a look he had always mistaken for boredom, but now recognized as intense concentration. The strange technical questions she would sometimes ask, disguised as idle curiosity. The long afternoons she spent at the museum or with her charity committee periods of time when she was completely unreachable. He had once come home early and found her in her study, a room he rarely entered, staring at a screen filled with what looked like gibberish. She had clicked it off quickly, smiling her serene smile. "Just trying to learn a bit about how your world works, darling," she had said. "It's all so fascinatingly complex." He had patted her on the head, a condescending gesture of affection, and told her not to worry her pretty little head about it. The memory now sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated fear through him. He had not just underestimated her. He had been blind to her. Utterly, catastrophically blind. His first call was to Arthur Klein, his lawyer. She did it, Arthur. The bitch took everything. Kate's voice was a ragged, unrecognizable shriek. "Kate, calm down. What are you talking about?" "Who took what, Athena?" "She cleaned me out. Everything. The company accounts my personal funds. All of it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Kate, that's not possible. The security protocols on the SVG accounts are state-of-the-art. You designed them yourself." She helped me. Kate whispered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "In the beginning. She helped me build the damn thing." His second call was to David Chen, his CFO. It went straight to voicemail. A text message from an unknown number pinged on his shattered phone a moment later. It was a picture of David Chen, bound and gagged in what looked like a hotel room, a copy of the day's Wall Street Journal, held up next to his terrified face to prove the time and date. The message below the image was simple. "David is resigning effective immediately. He wishes you the best in your future endeavors. Don't call the police. It will be bad for his health, and for yours." Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a coup, a hostile takeover of his entire life. He spent the next few hours in a state of frantic, impotent fury. He called his contacts at the FBI's cybercrime division, powerful men he had cultivated over years of donations and political favors. They listened, they sympathized, but they were powerless. The money was gone, vanished into the decentralized, unregulated wilderness of the blockchain. Tracing it, they said, would be like trying to trace a single drop of water in the ocean. He called his bankers. They were apologetic but firm. The transfers were all authenticated. The signatures were all valid. As far as they were concerned, everything was legal and above board. By noon, the news had started to leak. A junior analyst at Sterling Vance, unable to process a routine transaction, had raised an alarm. The rumor mill of Wall Street began to churn slowly at first, then with accelerating vicious speed. SVG is insolvent. Kate Vance is broke. The king has been dethroned. The pre-market gains vanished, replaced by a catastrophic plunge. His company's stock, the bedrock of his remaining non-liquid wealth, was in freefall. Margin calls started flooding in, demanding collateral he no longer possessed. He stood in the center of his magnificent penthouse, the city skyline spread out before him like a kingdom that was no longer his. He was trapped, a prisoner, in his own gilded cage. The silence of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. He thought of Athena, of her calm, composed face as she ate her scallops, her quiet defiance, her smile as she walked away into the night. It hadn't been a smile of defeat. It had been a smile of victory. She had been playing a different game all along, a long, patient game of chess, while he had been playing checkers. He had slid the divorce papers across the table, thinking he was ending a chapter. He had just handed the pen to the author of his ruin. The empire of Kate Vance had not fallen. It had been meticulously, brilliantly, and silently dismantled from the inside out. And he, the master of the universe, had never even seen it coming. While Kate Vance was watching his world burn, Athena was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, sipping green tea in the hushed, anonymous comfort of a first-class cabin. She wasn't on a commercial flight. She was on a private charter, a sleek Bombardier Global 7500, paid for with a cryptocurrency transfer so obscure it barely registered on any exchange. The plane had been booked under the name Dr. Evelyn Reed, a respected if reclusive ornithologist, on her way to a conference in Lisbon. Her destination was not Lisbon. It was a small private airfield just outside of Zug, Switzerland, a place affectionately known as Crypto Valley. It was the global epicenter of financial technology and digital assets, a haven for the brilliant, the paranoid, and the radically anti-establishment. It was, in short, her kind of town. Athena, or rather Evelyn, looked out the window at the endless blue expanse of the ocean. She felt a sense of calm that was as deep and vast as the water below. It wasn't the giddy thrill of revenge. It was something more profound. It was the quiet satisfaction of a complex equation finally solved, of a meticulously crafted plan, executed to perfection. The man sitting across from her, a lanky, pale individual, with a shock of unruly red hair, and a nervous energy that seemed to vibrate at a different frequency from the rest of the world, was named Miles. In the digital world, he was known as Daedalus. He was a legendary coder, a prodigy who had made a fortune in the early days of Bitcoin, and then vanished from public life, disgusted by the corporate greed that had co-opted the decentralized dream. Athena had found him not through money, but through a shared language of code. She had reached out to him on a secure, encrypted channel, proving her bona fides by solving a cryptographic puzzle he had posted years ago as a test one that no one had ever been able to crack. He was the only person on Earth she trusted to help her build the final phase of her new life. "The assets are nested," Miles said, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his laptop, which was hardwired directly into the plane's satellite internet. "The DeFi protocols are holding. We've layered the smart contracts so that any attempt to freeze one asset automatically triggers a swap and a move to a new wallet. It's a hydra. They cut off one head, two more grow in its place." "And David Chen?" Athena asked, her voice calm. "Safely ensconced at the Dolder Grand in Zurich," Miles replied with a grin. "He was surprisingly cooperative once we explained the situation. Seems his loyalty to Kate was directly proportional to the number of zeros in his bonus check. We've set him up with a new identity and a comfortable, if not extravagant, nest egg. He's more than happy to disappear." Athena nodded. It had been a necessary, if distasteful, part of the plan. Neutralizing Chen had been crucial. Leaving him in New York would have created a loose end, a potential witness who could, under pressure, begin to piece together a narrative. Chen, the terrified hostage, was a far more useful fiction than Chen, the disgruntled, talkative ex-CFO. "The final stage is ready." Miles continued, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. "Project Chimera is live." Project Chimera was Athena's true masterpiece. It was more than just hiding Kate's money. It was about giving it a new purpose. For years she had watched Kate's immoral pursuit of wealth. He invested in companies that exploited workers, that polluted the environment, that profited from human misery. He called it capitalism. She called it a crime. Chimera was the antidote. It was a decentralized, autonomous organization, a DAO governed not by a CEO or a board of directors, but by unbreakable smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. Its purpose was to identify and fund projects that Kate would have sneered at: green energy, startups, fair trade cooperatives, independent journalism outlets, and educational programs for underprivileged women in STEM. The $1 billion she had taken from Kate Vance would now be the seed capital for a new kind of empire, an empire of progress, of ethics, of hope. The funds would be allocated by a community of token holders, all of whom would be vetted and chosen by Athena and Miles for their expertise and integrity. It was a self-sustaining, self-governing engine for positive change, funded by the ill-gotten gains of a titan of toxic capitalism. It was poetry. Upon landing in Zug, Athena was met not by a limousine, but by a discreet electric Audi. She was taken to a secure, modern apartment overlooking the lake, a place that was registered to yet another shell corporation, this one based in Panama. The life of Athena Vance, with its society galas, its designer clothes, and its suffocating expectations, was over. The life of Nix, the architect, the ghost, the silent force for change, had just begun. Back in New York, Kate was a man besieged. His lawyers were in damage control. His PR team was issuing frantic, unconvincing denials, and his remaining employees were fleeing a sinking ship. The SEC had launched a formal investigation. The board of directors, the same men who had clapped him on the back and profited from his ruthlessness for years, were now calling for his head. He had hired a team of the best private cybersecurity investigators money could buy, a firm called Cortex Forensics, run by a former Mossad agent. They had descended upon his office, their faces grim, their equipment a dazzling array of high-tech wizardry. After 48 hours of relentless, round-the-clock work, the lead investigator, a severe-looking man named Kobe, had delivered the verdict. He had stood in the center of Kate's now chaotic office, his expression a mixture of professional respect and pity. Mr. Vance Kobe had said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "What we have here, it's not a hack, it's a work of art. The architecture is flawless, the execution perfect. Every trail leads to a dead end, every digital footprint vanishes into thin air. We've seen state-sponsored cyber warfare that was less sophisticated than this." Kobe paused, running a hand over his shaved head. "Whoever did this wasn't just a thief. They were a ghost, a phantom. They knew your systems better than you did. They were inside the walls before you even built the house." Kate had just stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Her name, he had whispered, is Athena. Kobe had simply shaken his head. We can find no digital trace of any Athena connected to this. The entity that perpetrated this attack has no name, no face. In the few fragmented data packets we've managed to recover, there's only one recurring signature. A single word in Greek. "What is it?" Kate had asked, his voice trembling. Nix Kobe had replied, "It means night." The name sent a fresh wave of ice through Kate's veins. He remembered a conversation from years ago on their honeymoon in Greece. They had been visiting the Temple of Hephaestus in Athens. Athena had been staring at the ancient stones, a strange, wistful look on her face. If you could be any of the Greek gods, he had asked her, who would you be? He had expected her to say Aphrodite or Hera, a goddess of beauty or marriage. Nyx, she had said without hesitation. The goddess of the night. She was a primordial entity, so powerful that even Zeus feared her. He had laughed, dismissing it as a morbid romantic fantasy. He hadn't understood. He hadn't been listening. The divorce papers now sitting on his desk seemed like a relic from another lifetime. A foolish, arrogant miscalculation that had cost him everything. He had thought he was setting himself free. He had only succeeded in unshackling a goddess, and she in turn had plunged his world into an endless, starless night. He was no longer Kate Vance, the Titan. He was just a man alone in the dark, haunted by the ghost of the woman he had so spectacularly failed to see. The first public statement from Project Chimera appeared 1 week after the heist. It wasn't a press release sent to mainstream media outlets. It was a signed message posted on a decentralized publishing platform, immutable and uncensorable. The message was elegant, precise, and devastating. It didn't mention Kate Vance by name. It didn't have to. It spoke of a significant involuntary philanthropic donation from a major player in the predatory financial sector. It detailed with surgical accuracy how this capital once used to fund environmental degradation and labor exploitation would now be redeployed to support their opposites. The message was signed with a single cryptic initial N. The story exploded. The financial world, already reeling from the rumors of Sterling Vance's collapse, was now faced with a narrative that was part Robin Hood, part Sun Tzu. Kate wasn't just broke. He was a punchline, a cautionary tale about hubris and the hidden dangers of underestimating the person sleeping next to you. His name, once a symbol of power and success, was now inextricably linked with this act of grand poetic justice. For Kate, it was the final crushing blow. He was a pariah on Wall Street, a leper in the exclusive social circles he had once dominated. His friends no longer took his calls. The invitations to galas and fundraisers had stopped. Anastasia, his vision of the future, had vanished. Her final communication, a text message that read, "Suri, I can't do this. My psychic told me your aura is like super toxic RN." He was forced to sell the penthouse for a fraction of its worth to cover his mounting legal fees and personal debts. The Rolls-Royce was repossessed. The Patek Philippe was sold to a pawnbroker on 47th Street. He moved into a sterile, soulless corporate apartment in Midtown, a place that felt more like a witness protection safe house than a home. He was obsessed. The money was gone, his reputation was shattered, but his mind had narrowed to a single burning point of focus, finding Athena. It was no longer about revenge. It was about understanding. He needed to look her in the eye and ask her the question that haunted his every waking moment. Why he poured the last of his accessible funds into hiring Kobe's firm, not to recover the money, but to hunt for a ghost. Forget the digital trail, he had told the ex-Mossad agent, his voice raw with desperation. Look for the human one. Travel records, property deeds, anything. She has to be somewhere. Kobe and his team were good. They were the best. They sifted through the wreckage of Athena's former life, looking for clues. They discovered the shell corporation that owned the West Village brownstone. They found the digital breadcrumbs that led to the private charter flight. They traced the ghost to Zurich. It was Kobe himself who called Kate with the news. We have a possible location, the Dolder Grand Hotel. A woman matching her description has been seen there. She's using the name Dr. Elena Petrova, a supposed art historian. A surge of adrenaline, the first positive feeling he'd had in weeks, shot through Kate. I'm on the next flight, he said. 2 days later, Kate Vance walked into the opulent old-world lobby of the Dolder Grand. He was a shadow of his former self. His expensive suit hung on his thinner frame. His eyes were sunken and bloodshot, and his movements were filled with a nervous, twitchy energy. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man on the edge of a complete nervous breakdown. He saw her immediately. She was sitting in the garden terrace overlooking the city of Zurich and the shimmering lake beyond. She was not hiding. She was waiting. She wore a simple, elegant white linen dress, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked serene, confident, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. There was a strength in her posture, a clarity in her eyes that had never been there in their old life. He approached her table slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She simply watched him come, a calm, unreadable expression on her face. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her. Kate, she said, her voice even and cool. I was wondering when you'd arrive. He sank into the chair, his legs suddenly weak. He stared at her, the woman who had been his wife, the woman who had become his nemesis. Athena, he breathed. Why? She took a slow sip of her tea before answering. You never saw me, Kate. Not really. You saw a reflection of yourself, an accessory that complemented your lifestyle. You saw a piece of property, and when you got tired of it, you tried to dispose of it with a severance package, as if I were a redundant employee. I loved you, he said, the words feeling hollow and false, even to his own ears. No, she replied, her gaze unwavering. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a wife who was smart enough to be interesting, but not so smart that she might challenge you. You loved having a beautiful hostess for your parties. You loved the convenience of me. But you never once asked me what I wanted. You never once cared to know who I truly was. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. That night at Perse, when you slid those papers across the table, you didn't just end our marriage. You set me free. You reminded me of the woman I was before I met you, the woman you tried so hard to forget. Kate was speechless. Every word she spoke was the undeniable, devastating truth. He had been a fool, blinded by his own reflection in the glittering funhouse of his success. The money, he finally managed to stammer. Why take it all? Why ruin me? It was never your money. Kate, she said, her voice laced with a cold fire. You didn't earn it. You accumulated it. You were a dragon sitting on a hoard of gold. You did nothing with but count. That money was amassed through deals that destroyed lives, wrecked communities, and poisoned the planet. I didn't steal it. I liberated it. She gestured vaguely towards the city below. That money, is now funding dozens of projects around the world. It's building schools in Uganda. It's reforesting parts of the Amazon. It's providing microloans to female entrepreneurs in India. It's doing the good in the world that you were always too selfish and too soulless to even consider. The scale of her vision, the sheer audacity of her plan, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been playing for status, for ego. She had been playing for the world. It was the final humiliating checkmate. So what now? He asked, his voice a broken whisper. What happens to me? Athena leaned back in her chair, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her eyes. That Kate is entirely up to you. For the first time in your life, you are a man, with no fortune, no power, and no influence. You are just a man. You can see that as a prison, or you can see it as an opportunity. You can finally learn what it means to build something real, something of actual value, or you can fade into obscurity. The choice is yours. She stood up, her white dress catching the gentle Swiss breeze. Goodbye, Kate. She turned and walked away, not looking back. She moved with the grace and purpose of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. Kate Vance sat alone at the table, a forgotten king in a foreign land, with nothing but the wreckage of his past and the terrifying empty canvas of his future. The check had come, and he had finally discovered the true cost of underestimating the woman who had been eating her dinner while he planned the end of her world, never realizing she was about to begin his. So what's the lesson in the story of Kate and Athena Vance? Is it a tale of revenge, or is it something more? It's a story about visibility, about what happens when we refuse to see the people right in front of us, when we value wealth over worth and power over partnership. Kate Vance didn't just lose his money. He lost the chance to know the incredible woman he was married to. He saw a possession, and in the end, he was dispossessed of everything that mattered. Her victory wasn't just in emptying his bank account. It was in reclaiming her own identity and rewriting her future. What do you think? Was Athena a hero or a villain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of a woman scorned and a titan toppled compelling, don't forget to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good story of justice, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us that the quietest people often have the most to say.